Good afternoon. We're going to get started now, and hopefully if there's folks who are still waiting for the elevators, they'll join us shortly. Thank you all for joining us today for our first public forum of the semester, Logistic Workers Rise. I'm Sarah Watson. I'm the director of the Joseph S. Murphy Institute at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. And I'm very appreciative for all of our participants that are here today, General President of the Teamsters, Sean O'Brien, Jane McAlevey, Steve Viselli, and Chris Molinsky, as well as Professor Samir Santi, our moderator. I also want to acknowledge and thank the staff at SLU who made this event possible. My predecessor, Paula, Nadia, Michael, Rose, and the public engagement team, Aaron and the communications team, Sean and the IT team, and Keisha, Suzette, Hector, and Marta, and the operations and facilities teams. We will have audience Q&A at the end of the panel discussion, and there are a few ways that you can share your questions. We've collected pre-event questions during registration. You'll also be able to write questions during the event, and we'll be passing out, or you should find on your seats, note cards that you can write those. And we'll also have a live mic set up. As a space of learning, we encourage inquiry, dialogue, and debate, and we invite you to enter the event in good faith with respect and goodwill. It's my privilege now to introduce Gregory Mantios, founding Dean of CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies.
Thank you all, and thank you, Sarah. Sarah's the newest member of our leadership team, and we are so fortunate to have her. She is the director of the Murphy Institute and director of public programming here at SLU. Welcome, everybody. This is a real honor and a privilege to welcome you on behalf of the entire SLU community. I see a lot of new faces. We do this, we've been doing this for a long time, probably 30 years we've been having these public forums. And I'm always constantly surprised at all the new faces that I see here. So for those of you who are here for the very first time, I'm going to just say a very few words about the School of Labor and Urban Studies. We've been around this town and around the City University for 4 decades, but we became a self-standing school, the 25th and newest self-standing school of the City University of New York 5 years ago. This is our 5th anniversary. And I was just saying to Sean, this could not have been possible if it weren't for a strong and united labor movement in this town. And we thank all of the leaders labor leaders who helped us, and the rank and file who elected them and stood behind them when they chose to push for a labor school in the City University of New York. It was a big, big victory for all of us. And what's unique about this school, it is dedicated to public service and social justice. That's why we're here. And our mission is very simple. We're here to help prepare the next generation of labor and social justice leaders, and we're here to help workers achieve economic mobility through higher education. We offer undergraduate and graduate programs and certificates in labor relations, in community leadership, and organizing for social change, and of course in labor studies and urban studies. We're also about educating the broader community and in helping to shape the public discourse through policy debates, through civic engagement, through research, through publications. Our journal, New Labor Forum, has over 11,000 subscribers worldwide. We have a television show, we have a podcast, and we do these public programs at least once every month. So I could go on, and I won't. I will spare you that, but I want to direct you to our website if you're interested in learning more about who we are and what we do. So now to today's program. This is part of an ongoing series we're going to be doing. We did one last year to launch our season on new leaders and new ideas. Last year, we had Chris Smalls from the Amazon Labor Union speak, and we can plan to continue these on at least an annual basis. So, I don't have to tell this crowd, these are very tough times, and they could get a lot worse. We're witnessing unprecedented level of economic and social inequality, and we are seeing the rise of a populist radical right that is posing unprecedented threats to our democracy. On the other hand, this is also the most hopeful of times, at least, for me. When I witness the rising worker militancy, when I see the shift in public opinion turning in favor of labor unions, and when I see the engagement of progressive youth in unions and in electoral politics, it warms my heart. And that's just for starters. So it's in this context that we see the rise of new leaders and new ideas. And Sean O'Brien is at the forefront of that rise. You'll hear an introduction in a minute, but I want to thank him for his leadership, and of course, thank you for being here today. When we first arranged for Sean to visit us here, it was in late June, and quite frankly, we didn't know whether the union was going to be on strike or licking its wounds or celebrating a victory, and we're awfully glad that it's the latter. So, Sean, thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. Thank you also to the panelists who you'll meet in a minute, and of course, to Sarah and her staff. So let me return the program back to Sarah. Thank you all for being here.
Our moderator for today is Professor Samir Santi, and Dr. Santi teaches in both the Labor and Urban Studies programs here at SLU, and is also the Books and Arts editor of SLU's New Labor Forum, which I'll note our fall issue is hot off the press, and there are display copies for you to take a look at the registration table. Prior to arriving at SLU, Samir served excuse me, as special advisor on the presidential campaign for Senator Bernie Sanders, and Dr. Santi is currently working on expanding his dissertation entitled The Price of Prosperity, Inflation and the Limits of the New Deal Order for Publication. And so I invite Samir to take the stage.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, Dean Mancios, and thanks as well to the members of our Labor Advisory Committee who are in attendance today, including Chair Arthur Chiliotis. And thanks to all of you for being here and bearing with us on a a surprise event with the elevators. But I'm glad to see that this room has filled out, and we're really grateful for your making the time this afternoon. It is a tremendous privilege and honor of mine to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote of the Labor Speaker Series this year, International Brotherhood of Teamsters General President Sean O'Brien. President O'Brien is a fourth-generation member of the union, having got his start as a heavy equipment driver in the rigging industry at the age of 18. In 2006, he became the youngest president in the long history of Teamsters Local 25 in Boston, and under his leadership, that local increased its membership by more than 25%. In 2011, he was elected Eastern Region Vice President for the IBT, and in March of 2022, about a year and a half ago, he was elected as the 11th General President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. In addition to having led a successful contract campaign with UPS, the nation's largest private sector union employer, and having overseen all matters involving the IBT's 1.2 million members, President O'Brien has, over the past few months, spent time advocating for working people and working class interests on TV, on Capitol Hill, and all over the place. So it goes without saying that those of us at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies are incredibly grateful that he's made the time to be here with us today, and we're incredibly proud to have him. open our speaker series this year. So please join me in welcoming IBT General President Sean O'Brien.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I want to thank, obviously, the Labor Council. I want to thank Sarah for all her great work. But more importantly, I want to thank all of you for giving us the opportunity to tell our story and to give you some insight on where we think the labor movement is headed, and strictly a perspective from the Teamsters Union. But I think we're pretty close to knowing what's going on in the industry and what's going on in corporate America, and what the thought process is from the political aspect of the United States of America. So before I get into giving you a little bit of history on what we achieved recently at UPS, I want to recognize our Joint Council 16 President, Tom Giswalty, who is responsible for overseeing all the Teamster local unions in downtown New York. And also the Secretary-Treasurer, who thankfully the service elevator worked, because we were sweating at walking up 18 flights of stairs, right, Demos? Demos Demopoulos as well, the Secretary-Treasurer, Joint Council 16. So look, we achieved history collectively in the Teamsters Union about a month ago today, and we were able to secure the largest, most historic collective bargaining agreement in the United States of America. It is the largest private sector collective bargaining agreement covering 340,000 men and women throughout the United States. It's a contract that's very diverse, very intricate, and it's one of a kind when it comes to achieving the goals and objectives that our rank and file members set forth. It's a population where 54% of the workforce is part-time, and the remainder of the workforce is full-time. And when we went into these negotiations, we had clear and concise objectives. And those objectives were met because we had rank and file interaction, which is the most important tool and the most vital leverage that you can utilize in any and all negotiations. And what we did differently this time, and you know, the Teamsters Union, and I can say this because I'm 4 generations, I've held every single position within the organization. We were antiquated previously as far as our thought process, and we were campaigning to take back our international union. You often heard our rhetoric, or my rhetoric, saying, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So when we took over leadership 18 months ago, it was clear and concise that what we were doing was not working, it was antiquated, and we needed to not lose sight of our core values and institutional knowledge and generational knowledge that's passed down, but we also had to incorporate the new way of thinking, a more sophisticated way of thinking, a more sophisticated way of getting our messaging out. You know, back 40 or 50 years ago, when you negotiated a contract as a union leader, you came in and banged your hand on the table and said, these are our demands or else, and, you know, through fear and intimidation, you usually got what you wanted, which was a good thing. But unfortunately, times change, and tactics need to change, and that was one of our goals and objectives in this UPS agreement. Now, historically, the Teamsters Union, I've been involved in 4 national negotiations, would go in a year prior to the contract expiring. We also have, outside of the national agreement, contained in the national agreement, we've got 44 supplements, addendums, and riders. And those supplements, addendum, and riders, for everybody's clarification, are basically local area working conditions and also different benefit packages. So we had to navigate through a lot of intricacies, as I stated earlier. But historically, we'd go in, negotiate the national agreement, and then focus on the supplemental agreements. And the supplemental agreements are probably more important than the national agreement because those are the local area conditions. Those are the conditions outside of the national that are germane to the communities and neighborhoods and the geographies that people work. And they're all different. Some are high cost of living areas like, you know, New York City, Boston, San Francisco. Others, you know, maybe more rural, doesn't require a whole lot of cost of living, but the contracts are the same throughout. So it was important that we recognize that we needed to take on this animal with a whole different approach. And often 2 times we were going into negotiations as a Teamsters union, impatient, wanting to get the deal done. What we did as a leadership team, not only at UPS, but right off the bat, we had 3 national contracts up. And we made a statement right away that we were not going to negotiate beyond expiration dates of contract. We were not going to make extensions because that's convenient for the company. That's convenient for corporate America. That's convenient. But it's not convenient for our members. It's not effective for our members. So what we did with UPS is we gave a directive. And what's important now, I think, in the labor movement that we haven't been able to do, but we recently have done this at UPS, we, the union, control the narrative and flow of how these negotiations were going to go. And we dictated to the company that we were not going to start negotiations 6 months prior to the contract expiring, and we would not start national negotiations until all 44 supplements had a tentative agreement subject to ratification of the national agreement. So we put a mandate on the supplements first, which we've never done before, shorten the window of negotiations, put deadlines on these negotiations. But the most important thing that we had for the first time ever in these negotiations, we had rank and file members represented by every classification sitting at these negotiations across from what I call white-collar crime syndicates, corporate America. And, you know, when you go into negotiations, historically, you would sit there across the table from your opponent with no representation from the rank and file, and you would actually give secondhand testimonials to your opponent who would go back and negate and disparage anything you've said. This negotiation concluded that we had tremendous support, but also testimonials from the people sitting there. You know, the single mothers who are working 3 and 4 jobs, who may be on subsidized housing or a subsidized meal plan, trying to provide a living for their families, saying that $16.25 or $16.50 per hour was not enough, without opportunities for full-time jobs. You had package car drivers who were working in Arizona with excessive heat and issues where people were dying on the job because there were no air conditioning or proper ventilation in these package cars. And many, many more testimonials where when you're getting it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, there's not a whole lot you can contradict and or try and negate. So that proved to be the most effective tool. But prior to going into these negotiations, we did what has never been done before. We actually identified every single issue that was specific to every single member that worked in the bargaining unit that needed to change. And that resulted in 60 non-economic changes in the largest collective bargaining agreement, all favorable for our rank and file members that work at UPS without one concession or give back. As we all know in negotiations, thank you. As we all know in negotiations, you know, there always was this attitude from both sides that if you want something, you have to give it back. Well, that's not true. That is not true. And we proved that moving forward. But what made us a success in validating all these demands was that we started a contract campaign 1 year prior to the contract expiring, identifying, and you've probably heard me say this a lot on national TV, stating our intentions on what we needed to see change in this agreement. Now, we had a great amount of leverage outside of 340,000 rank and file Teamsters. We had a company that provided 7% of the gross national product, and we also had 1 out of every 4 package was loaded and delivered on a UPS truck. So we had tremendous amount of leverage with some scrutiny from, you know, the other white-collar crime syndicate known as politicians in Washington, D.C. that were looking to blame anybody for potentially throwing this country into a recession. Well, our attitude was all along that we know who we work for. We work for the rank and file members at UPS, and we do not work for politicians, and we do not work for white-collar crime syndicates known as corporate America. We work for the hard-working men and women who provided goods and services through the toughest times and proved our worth that we were essential through the pandemic. So we had a lot of credible arguments, and we stated our intentions clearly throughout this campaign. We went city by city, state by state, location by location, identifying and articulating what needed to change in this contract. And our narrative the whole time, because I think what people see is, why does a union want to strike a company? Why does a Teamsters union want to strike UPS? And our response to that was, we don't want to strike UPS if UPS does not concede to the demands and change their behavior and reward the people that actually make them the success, and not worry about the balance sheet at the end of the day, and reward the people that make them the success, then UPS will be choosing to put themselves on strike. So we were clear, we stated our intentions, and we went and negotiated the most lucrative historic agreement in the entire country, which was ratified by 86% of our members. But that wouldn't have been possible without demonstrating what we were capable of. I think through July, if everybody was paying attention, talks broke down on July 4th or 5th, July 5th at 4 a.m. when UPS chose to walk out, when they said they had no more to give. And we strictly demanded that they come back to the table. They refused. That's when we unleashed our practice picketing. And we were preparing for a year. We were preparing the narrative, but we were also preparing the most important leverage we had was the rank and file members. We did an onslaught of practice picketing in every single location throughout the United States, every single morning and every single night, demonstrating not only the UPS, the solidarity, but to the general public on how important, how vital, and how essential our members were. UPS, after getting tormented on national TV, decided that they were in a position where they couldn't defend their position anymore, because we also did something that we never did before. We actually did a deep dive, and I think this will be the template moving forward for any and all negotiations with any and all unions, is that we got a little more sophisticated. And we took this argument to the street where we exposed they made $100 billion as a result of the pandemic. They also rewarded their stockholders 50% increase in dividend payments in January, and also gave out record bonuses for upper management and CEO. And that did not resonate well with the general public. That didn't resonate well with the customers. That didn't resonate well with our members that were working there. So they knew we were poised and ready to take on this fight. The one thing we did also is we leveraged our political influence in Capitol Hill. 18 months ago, prior to us taking over as new leadership team, we kind of fell in love with our captors, so to speak, in Washington, D.C. We would give them all kinds of money with all false hopes and promises, and they never delivered. And we fast forgive and forget what they didn't do for us. This time we made certain that we said, we don't want any influence from Washington, D.C. We don't want politicians getting involved in our business. My neighborhood where I come from, if two people are fighting in the middle of the street and you've got nothing to do with it, you just keep walking. We made it clear that we did not want Washington, D.C. and or politicians coming in for a couple of reasons. One, because it would signal that we were weak and that we were conceding to corporate America. And two, that we didn't need anybody else in our fight, and we didn't want anybody else trying to claim victory on behalf of the 340,000 rank and file members who emboldened us and entrusted us with their future. So it was very important that we control that narrative. And look, I think it was the most successful agreement. We protected against technology. We protected against an invasion of privacy with inward-facing cameras. We protected jobs from being replaced with autonomous vehicles and tractor trailers. We created 7,500 new jobs. We also got an agreement where they have to replace 22,000 jobs that are set to be retired. And they also agreed that in the event technology, for some reason, does diminish some of the functions, that they will bargain the effects and create new full-time jobs as a result of technology. So we are extremely, extremely successful in many different areas. But the most important one, I believe, outside of taking care of everybody there, was the part-timers in America. These part-timers, this fight for 15 that we always heard of, and I think New York led the charge about a decade ago, fighting for $15 per hour. That was an antiquated argument that we could not allow to happen at the table. I mean, you think about a $100 billion company per year in earnings, and one of the most successful companies, and you have your employees working 2 or 3 jobs, living in government housing, or some in shelters, homeless. Pretty embarrassing for the brand, and we were able to expose that. We were able to get UPS to bring those folks that are at $16.50 per hour, immediately up to $21 an hour. Longevity bonuses in 2027, starting rate of pay will be $23 an hour. That was a 48% increase in wages for our part-timers at UPS, which is unheard of. We were also able to protect, preserve, and improve the benefits. Make sure that people had health care that was fully paid by the employer, Teamster Healthcare. And I got to tell you, as a 4th-generation Teamster, and we didn't have a whole lot going on, but we knew we had the best organization backing us, Teamsters Union. I've had Teamsters Healthcare. April of 2024, it'll be 52 years I've had the same benefits, and I know how important those benefits are. I was fortunate to learn about the Teamsters Union around the dinner table. Being a 4th-generation Teamster, no one else ever held office. It was all rank and file. And every narrative around our dinner table was about the Teamsters Union, about the benefits, how important it was. This is an organization, no matter how bad it gets, that is always going to be there and never leave us. We were able to give that hope back to that next generation, and more importantly, educate this next generation of workers throughout this process, because many of our part-timers have no generational connection to the Teamsters Union. And we were doing contract campaign rollouts, when we were doing practice picketing, those 20, 21-year-olds were never so inspiring to me to see that there is hope, there is determination to fight for what is important, to fight for the rights that, you know, have been fought for us for over 100 years, and to protect, preserve, and improve working conditions moving forward. So that was a tremendous success, and I think, I know that this is the template throughout the union movement on how to actually design, execute, and ratify a collective bargaining agreement. But more importantly, it sets a tone for how corporate America should be dealt with. We were able to expose this company on their earnings. We were able to expose this company on lack of respect for the people that make them a success. But more importantly, we were able to hold them accountable because we had a credible threat of a militant union that wasn't afraid to strike. And I think we all have to recognize that sometimes the threat is worse than the action, especially when you can demonstrate the solidarity and the collaboration. I mean, look, the power of collaboration to effectuate change was never so evident in what we just achieved in this UPS agreement. And why is that important? It's important for our UPS workers, but I think it's important for the labor movement, because the one thing we haven't done good in a labor movement is organize new members. I think, you know, for too long, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, our leadership team, when we decided to run 3 years ago, we were sick and tired of seeing that our organization was being babysat. There was no progressive movement, there was no thinking, there was no direction, there was no plan to organize. We were just sitting back, hoping for the best, and, you know, throwing our hands up with no real plan to make this union bigger, faster, or stronger. So what we did with the UPS agreement and all the other agreements we did, DHL, American Red Cross, we got record earnings, we got record benefit increases, ability to organize with card check neutrality, but we've shown corporate America that we are not afraid to fight. And you can't be afraid to lose, because it's a battle you may lose, but the war is going to go on forever and ever. And so when we negotiate these contracts, that's a vital part of organizing, because I think we all can recognize through social media, through this next generation, that there is a thirst for knowledge, and people want a demonstration right now of what they are going to get if they organize and join a union. It's unfortunate, and our labor laws are so weak right now, and that corporate America and these big companies like Amazon and Starbucks, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars per year trying to bust unions all over this country. And it's actually disturbing when you organize, and it takes 400 days on average to negotiate a substandard first contract. But when you have strong contracts that set industry standards, and you go to workers that are non-union, that are doing the same work as our members at UPS, our members at DHL, our members in the Republic Waste, our members in construction, and you show them the highest standards, where you show them you're going to be guaranteed wage increases, you're going to have cost of living increases, you're going to have fully paid medical, you're going to have pensions that you're going to be able to retire on and maintain your lifestyle when you retire, but more importantly, you're going to have dignity and respect in the workplace. That is going to be our biggest tool to organizing. And Amazon, as we've made no secret from the Teamsters Union, they're a major target for us, and we are going after them with everything we have. And Amazon is not just a threat in the parcel delivery business. It's in the grocery distribution, and I think right now, if we see what's going on in Hollywood with the Writers Guild strike, with the Screen Actors Guild strike, 10, 15 years ago, and I know a little something about the motion picture industry, corporate America wasn't involved so much in the motion picture industry. But now you have Netflix, you've got Amazon, you've got Apple, you've got Disney, you've got streaming media, and all they're concerned about is their bottom line of the balance sheet. All they're concerned about is how they can do their work cheaper and make the most amount of money, how they can utilize artificial intelligence. So this fight that we're taking on with Amazon or any other corporation or any other global company may not affect what you're doing right now or the industries you represent, but at some point in time, it could affect you. There is an ancillary benefit and a potential for disaster if we are not collaborating and fighting, even though that fight may not be yours today, it could be yours tomorrow. You look at the United Auto Workers right now. They're in the battle of their life, and I commend them for taking on the big three. I commend them for taking the fight on. But they're in an uphill battle, and they need us, organized labor, to come together. And we talked about being collateral damage if we're not supporting our brothers and sisters. We have 4,000 members in the Teamsters Union that haul cars out of these manufacturers every day. High-paid, middle-class jobs. If UAW does not win this strike, then they are going to look to take on the Teamsters Union. They're going to look to take on other unions, and it's going to send a message to corporate America that organized labor is not willing to fight. And we cannot leave our brothers and sisters in any union alone to fight on their own. We need to collaborate, but more importantly, we need to put our differences aside, like at that dinner table I talked about in my house, and there was a lot of dialogue, there was a lot of criticism in an Irish Catholic household. But the one thing we were taught by a strong woman who brought us up was that when we walk out this door, regardless of what we talked about, regardless of our differences of opinions, we are walking out this door, one voice, one mission, and that's to protect the family, and our family is organized labor. So we need to do a better job of doing that moving forward. But look, I think we're in a great opportunity as unions go. I think we've proven collectively we're not afraid to fight. I think we've also captured, a difference of opinions through the pandemic on how essential we are providing goods and services to this country. But more importantly, we recognize and we point out how ineffective some of these politicians that we elect are. And as labor unions, we need to do a better job of selecting the candidate, not so much based upon our personal issues and our social beliefs, but we got to elect candidates that are going to enable us to put food on our family's table, to buy a home, to put our children through college, and to ensure that we retire with some respect and dignity. All too often, these politicians, and I've seen it in my 18 months in Washington, D.C., they are corruptible. They fall in love with big business, big money, and they forget about the people they're elected to represent, and that's the constituents, that's in their neighborhood, that's you and I, those are our members. So we have to remind them, and we've done a pretty good job of reminding these politicians, and this isn't just a Republican issue, Democratic issue, independent issue. We've got to also learn how to work together politically to ensure that these big corporations like Amazon, like Elon Musk, like Starbucks, do not dictate policy for working people in this country. We're going to make certain the people that we elect truly are working for their constituents, and that is the American public. Now, look, you've heard me say this time and time again. We are 1.3 million members. We were 1.2 when we took over, so we've had some growth in 18 months. But we cannot be afraid to take on the fight. We cannot be afraid because of risk. We cannot be afraid because of threats from corporate America or politicians. You know, we have a saying at the Teamsters Union that we would rather ask for forgiveness than permission. And the one thing that's clear is that this fight is going to continue. We owe it to the people that have paved the way for us. We owe it to the future members, but you owe it to yourselves to have the courage and conviction to take on that fight. And I got a message on behalf of the Teamsters Union, 1.3 million strong. When you take one of us on in organized labor, you take all of us on, and it's a full contact sport. Put your helmets on and buckle your chin straps. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to welcome our panelists up for the discussion of the afternoon on logistics work. And while they're coming up, I'll introduce them when they get up here. Let me just say, we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the discussion. We've received a number of questions. We'll have some of those. I'll try to make sure that we got time to take some from the field as well by the time we get there. So let me invite up Steve Viscelli, Jane McAlevey, and Chris Smolinski for the panel discussion. If you want to hang out after the panel, you can. If you want to be, I'll be absolutely love that. Yeah, sure. Thanks again, President O'Brien. Moving on to the part two of our afternoon session, I want to introduce our illustrious panelists who are going to engage in what I am certain is going to be a rich and stimulating discussion. In order, let's go in alphabetical order of last name. First is Jane McAlevey. Jane is a longtime union organizer, negotiator, author, and scholar of the labor movement, who also happens to be a fourth-generation union member like President O'Brien. After having spent many years working on organizing campaigns large and small around the country, she went on to earn a PhD in sociology from our very own Graduate Center at the City University of New York, where she began working on her first of what have become multiple acclaimed books on union organizing and labor strategy. Her most recent book, co-authored with Abby Lawler, is Rules to Win By: Power and Participation in Union Negotiations, published this year by Oxford University Press. Jane is currently a senior policy fellow at the UC Berkeley Institute for Labor and Employment Relations and writes a regular column for The Nation magazine. Next, Chris Smolinski is a third-generation Teamster who comes out of the union's trade show division. For many years, Chris has been a leader in Teamsters Local 25, where he was instrumental in building a futures committee dedicated to engaging with younger workers in the union's membership. And since 2015, he has served as the local's organizer, a role through which he has run successful campaigns to increase membership in one of the IBT's most militant locals. This record led President O'Brien, at the time serving as president of the New England Joint Council, to task Chris with leading a New England-wide organizing department. And in this capacity, Chris and his team have scored dozens of victories and organized more than 2,000 new members since the pandemic, contributing to bringing that membership number up from 1.2 to 1.3 million. Chris currently serves as Eastern Regional Director or Eastern Regional Coordinator of the IBT's organizing department and Deputy Director of the union's Amazon division. Finally, Steve Viselli is an economic sociologist who studies work, automation, and public policy. He's currently a faculty fellow at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy and lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of Pennsylvania. Steve's first book, The Big Rig, Trucking and the Decline of the American Dream, explains how deregulation of trucking and the rise of independent contracting turned trucking from one of the best blue-collar jobs in the United States into one of the toughest. His current research, which is in the works for a subsequent book, looks at the impact of self-driving trucks on truckers and e-commerce on last-mile delivery workers. So let's have a round of applause for our panelists just to start. And we are incredibly privileged also to have President O'Brien join us. So we have 4 incredible panelists. I did the introduction of President O'Brien. We all know him well at this point. So I'm going to kick it off. I want to get us started maybe with just one kind of question to each of the panelists, and then we'll open it up and hopefully turn into kind of a wide-ranging discussion. But just to kind of set the stage a little bit, I want to ask each of our panelists a question to get the ball rolling. So Steve, I want to start with you. I think, this panel is called Logistics Workers Rise. And so I think it would help if we could just start by taking a step back and defining what we mean by the logistics sector. Of course, the work of moving goods is as old as time immemorial, but the idea of logistics specifically as an economic sector is relatively new. And over the past several decades, the work done by people in these jobs has gotten a lot different. One could say worse. So could you get us started by explaining what we mean when we talk about logistics, and related to that, how have working conditions for those employed in this sector changed over the last few years or decades?
Yeah, thanks. Of course, workers have been moving goods around the economy for a long time. Logistics, really, I would pinpoint the start of it with trucking deregulation and the growth in global supply chains. And of course, logistics is, moving stuff between, fixed points of capital investment, whether it's extraction, production, right, into distribution. And so those have always been problematic for employers. What happened with the logistics revolution, which started several decades ago, is that in an effort to run from labor and to create global supply chains, capital stretched things out further and further. Initially, that was an advantage for the early adopters, right? But it became a big cost center as well. And so essentially what the logistics revolution is an attempt to kind of squeeze those costs back out and maintain that competitive advantage from moving stuff faster and cheaper, right? To lean out inventories. And of course, to maintain your mobility to avoid labor, source labor and resources cheaply abroad. A big part of that, of course, has been deregulation, right? Allowing employers to use cheaper systems, including independent contracting, which has been a big one, particularly in long-haul trucking, and technology. And so today what we're seeing is I would call sort of the second stage of that globalized supply chain revolution. We sort of stretched it out with the big box supply system, sort of think Walmart, right? So bringing stuff thousands of miles in relatively large quantities, few items, relatively few items to places where consumers go out to essentially a warehouse with a cash register and pick them up for themselves. And now we're entering the e-commerce, right, and delivery part of the logistics revolution. And that's a very different system, or very, very different part of the system, in which corporations are aspiring to give access to millions of different goods almost instantaneously and perceptibly at no cost to those consumers, right, wherever they are as fast as possible. And what that has meant is that we have tremendous pressure on delivery workers to make that work cheaper, faster, using technology, outsourcing, and the traditional methods that corporations use to make labor cheaper. And of course, it's going to have impacts on the existing services. And I'll just finish this by saying, what we have had, I mean, a lot of times we have this comparison between, say, UPS and what Amazon's doing with DSPs. Think of it this way. 10 years ago, when you got a package from UPS or FedEx, it was a relatively high-value good that you were going to sign for, right? What Amazon is trying to do is move cheap stuff, right? And so they need to put that downward pressure on the delivery cost, right? Because they're trying to take that Walmart store, right, that big box supply chain, and turn it into a last mile delivery. And that's really a fundamentally different process. And so what workers are experiencing is this algorithmic management and the de-skilling of that delivery work, taking that, if you will, from Braverman, if anybody's read that, right? The workman's brains out from underneath their cap. So they're trying to take that, knowledge, that experience, that career professional UPS package car driver, and turn it into an app on a phone, right? So that they can de-skill it and use cheaper labor to do that.
Great, thank you. And we'll be following up on all of this, but again, just to kind of set the stage a little bit. Jane, I want to move to you. And I think it might be helpful if similarly we could start by taking a step back and reflecting upon where we are as a labor movement today and what you see as some of the key strategic questions we face. I mean, as President O'Brien spoke about, I mean, it's an exciting time, but it's also a challenging time. And when the excitement is real, but also shouldn't be overstated. We are still seeing union membership drop. It is as hard as ever to win a first contract. So could you talk a little bit about how you make sense of this moment and, where we've been, where are we going?
Yeah, my pleasure. And it's a pleasure to be on the panelists with these great folks. Steve and I had the pleasure of being locked in an elevator together, so we got a little bit more time before arriving here. But yeah, I think we're in very interesting times. Precipice of, authoritarian rule and some real disasters out there. And then incredible promise, mainly because workers are fighting back in a really big way. I think, to the two unions that we are, one, addressing right here at the table, the Teamsters and the rebuild of the Teamsters under new leadership, and the UAW, which is also a union under, frankly, brand new leadership. We are already seeing the impact of something that I have always thought a lot about as an organizer and negotiator, and now as an author, which is the role of leadership. It's pretty fundamental at the shop floor level as well as at the national level. So you can see the change in two union leadership teams in big private sector unions has already led to a dramatic change. I want to back that up for a minute by saying that for the 20, maybe 40 years, depending on the two unions, where they were not being led by brilliant leadership that was bold, rather in some cases corrupt, asleep at the switch and just waiting to let things take whatever direction they took. There was a lot of other really exciting work happening. And that was important, I think, to set the stage for what came today. So in 2012, a marker that I think really mattered was when the Chicago really 2010, the Chicago Teachers Union leadership had a radical change. And it led to, in 2012, a strike that changed the discussion in this country in Chicago. Suddenly, you had 28,000 education workers off the job, which itself was radical in the last 30 years in this country. But not only were they 100% out, and every single right-wing institution continues in Chicago to prove, like 3 of them crossed, you can't say 100% out, 3 out of 28,000. All right, round it down. Anyway, that strike was not brilliant just because it produced a 100% strike with just a year and a half of the leadership getting ready to do it from what was largely a dead union for decades leading up to it. Their last strike had been 30-something years earlier. And the members were kind of put to sleep in the same way that they were in the auto workers, in the same way they were for years in the Teamsters, when the members are just ancillary to the process of the union itself. So Chicago kicks it off. They win an incredible strike, and part of why they won that incredible strike was because they did something ahead of time to outflank a very popular, or he was no longer, but a popular mayor when he first came to town, which is Rahm Emanuel, right, who left the actual White House, who was the national congressional fundraiser for Democrats, so that explains a lot, by the way, and went back to become the mayor of Chicago, and set his sole determination to destroy that strike. What he didn't know was that Karen Lewis, the genius president of the union, and her entire operation and the rank and file was way ahead of them in winning over community support and parent support. So when they took to the streets, and when, at the time, Mayor Rahm Emanuel stood up and said, you are hurting the parents and hurting the kids, about 400,000 parents poured into the street in the marches behind the educators. That, to me, was game changer one. That sets the tone for the changes that come later. Because in my life experience, workers are willing to stand up and risk and fight when they see other workers standing up, risking, fighting, and winning. Winning. I want to talk about winning. Workers don't stand up and take risk when they see defeat. They stand up and take risk when they see victory. So I think that's, frankly, the beginning of a huge rebuild. And just to go through another couple of game changers, that leads to a huge strike in Los Angeles in 2019 at the United Teachers of Los Angeles. Again, massive, 100% out, shut the city down, and won on a broad array of social issues inside and outside the workplace. Historic contract inside, built community support behind them, engaged the broader community in actual contract surveys, regional meetings with parent leaders to make sure the parents were brought to the table, and won on a bunch of issues that are not what we call, they're not mandatory subjects of bargaining. Labor law is so complicated. But there's mandatory subjects and there's permissive subjects. And they went from mandatory on the power of that strike and forced permissive subjects like bargaining to keep the Immigration Customs Enforcement police off of every single school in Los Angeles. That was an enormous victory that came from the parents' demands, because the ICE officers would pull up outside of public schools, wait for the kid to come out, wait for the parent to show up and arrest the parent. Like, that's what was going on in our public schools and being sanctioned. They eliminated that. And then I think the game changers become, in my own union, I should say, I'm a member of the United Auto Workers. I had the pleasure of voting to make it direct election by the president. That was a first fun vote. And the second two fun votes, because there were two more, was to get Shawn Fain as the leader of the union. By 2022, we have, Sean O'Brien in leadership. Soon after that, we have Shawn Fain in leadership. And even this year, we kick off 2023 with a massive strike by educators, this time 60,000 strong. There's a unity between the, I'll say, harder to replace and easier to replace. I don't like the term more skilled and less skilled, frankly. I think all workers are skilled. And in between that, we had the 2018, right up into the pandemic, we had the massive strikes, illegal, in red states across the education sector. So there was a lot building, and there were a lot of workers maybe having their expectations re-raised, that if you fight in this country, you could win. And then we had the pandemic. And things got kind of closed down there for a couple of years. And now we're coming out of it. And people are fighting like mad all around us. And people are winning. And the more we can win and show that fighting leads to winning, I think the more fighting there's going to be and the more winning that there's going to be. And the old notion of like social partnership, the old one of banging on the table in the European context, social partnership, it's all over. It's all done. Capital is global. When I'm out working in Germany or someplace in Europe, all the same union busting tactics that I survived A-level boss fights in this country, coaching thousands and thousands of workers through and how to beat an A-level boss fight in this country, where they're terrorizing you, captive audience meetings, firing people. When you can win those kind of campaigns, it positions you better, not just to go in and sweep up a good first contract in a hell of a lot less days than 400. I like to keep them to about 8 months from election to victory, by bringing in the whole community everywhere we go as our major source of power. So, there's a long way to go, but the context that got us to this moment when logistics we know is central. By the way, logistics has been a central discussion my entire life in the labor movement. We just wasn't clear how we were going to get there given the existing leadership of the unions that could play a central role in it. So along the way, we looked for other strategic sectors. Education is one. Those jobs are not going somewhere else. Maybe privatized, but they're not leaving the United States. Another is healthcare. You know, a nurse is not going to be giving a shot to somebody from China. They got to do it actually in their arm up close. So there are other strategic sectors, and I think that they helped lay the framework. And my last comment on this is in every one of those unions, just like in the Teamsters and the UAW, bold action, a belief in the power of the rank and file, a belief in the intelligence of the rank and file. Every one of those unions had to go through a leadership change to do what they did, every single one that I just listed. So I think leadership matters because that's when we enable the rank and file to play the kind of role, honor the intelligence of the people who are the members of the union, and direct us, frankly, in the direction that we need to go when we're at the table negotiating.
Thanks, Jane. Chris, I want to move to you, kind of building off what Jane said about leadership, fighting, winning, and what Sean said a moment ago about the definition of insanity being doing the same thing again and again and expecting new results. You are the one here with, along with President O'Brien, the most extensive experience organizing and representing workers in the logistics industry specifically, and you now serve as Deputy Director of the Amazon Division of the IBT. So I want to just kind of give you the floor to talk a little bit about what you see as the biggest opportunities and biggest challenges facing all of our collective efforts to take on this big company and this important industry generally.
Thank you. Biggest opportunities and the biggest hurdles. I mean, I think I'd like to start with the hurdles because I want to save the hope for last. But you know, I think the hurdles began a long time ago, right? When worker power was at its highest, and we were taking ownership of the shop floor and walking off the job and demanding contracts. You know, out came Taft-Hartley. Taft-Hartley was designed to handcuff the labor unions, right, to keep us at bay. And what we're starting to see is a resurgence of shop floor ownership. And that's one thing that we got away from. I believe it's because we were so strong at one point that we could just walk around, hand out cards. Everybody was connected to a labor union at some point, right? Everybody's mother, father, brother, cousin, somebody worked there, and the boss fights weren't what they are today, right? We had the power of the union and of the people. And that started to erode over time when we got into a representational mode. And I believe, you know, it's our own faults. We started to talk about this grievance machine and representation and, oh, you have an issue, let me handle it. Right, you have an issue, let me handle it. And I'm starting to see it come back to, you have an issue, how can you resolve it? Let's get a game plan. You have to take ownership. Right, so I think that we got into this mindset of representation and forgot where the power of the union actually came from. And the power of the union comes from the shop floor. It comes from the workers. Right, and we're starting to see that resurgence, especially here at the IBT under the leadership of O'Brien, recognizing the need to get involved on a shop floor level, to strategize with the workers, to push workers outside their comfort zone to take some ownership. Everyone's starting to see that, and that brings hope and light. And I think that's hugely important to what we're doing, and we're starting to see it all over the country. People are uprising. Young people are uprising. You know, I think for so long we were indoctrinated with get a job, go to work, keep your head down. The boss is the boss, right? People are just marching to work and taking whatever comes their way, and people are starting to get fed up. So now we need to harness that energy as a labor movement. We need to do the outreach, take the time to educate our new members, young members, reach out to our communities, hold our electeds accountable if we're going to move forward with this labor movement and capture this energy we have now. I believe this energy that we have now is a snapshot in time, and it might not last forever, so we need to do what we need to do to capture that. And that's getting back to the grassroots of empowering workers. And that's kind of the strategy you heard President O'Brien talk about UPS and the strategy they took to not only get the leverage to get that historic contract, but to engage the members, right? Get them involved, find out what they needed, what they wanted, have them participate in negotiation. And that's the strategies we're taking with everything, right? Specifically with Amazon. You can see Amazon uprising all over the country, right? And I don't believe there's a silver bullet for the Amazon, but I do believe that it has to be worker-driven. And the workers have to be willing to take ownership demand changes and do whatever's necessary to make those changes. And in my eyes, that has to be walking off the job. They have to be willing to shut it down. I mean, I think we can learn from some of the past and some of these bigger campaigns that we've gone after and see that where we didn't have the capacity to shut it down, a lot of those campaigns were failures. And we're seeing it. Workers are taking action in the Amazon division all across the country. We see it in Pontiac, we see it in Palmdale, we've seen it in San Bernardino. I mean, I don't know if everyone's aware, but currently right now we have the first ESP, that's a delivery service provider, those that you see in the van, that were misclassified, out on strike. These workers organized, they negotiated, ratified an agreement. Amazon on June 24th said, we're no longer going to do business with you. You're a bad actor, and discontinued service. These workers didn't cower. They didn't go find other jobs. They took it to the street. And they've been on the streets ever since. And there's no end in sight, right, for these workers giving up. They've extended pickets throughout the country. They're bringing awareness to it, and they're taking on the fight. And this is just 84 people. Now, if we can work together and create partnership programs with our communities, our workers, you know, our members, workers in the logistics industry as a whole, and start getting people to support these workers, have these conversations about taking the shop floor power back, what it means to collectively work together, educate them as to their rights, and provoke action, I believe we can take this on. And I believe we will win this. It may be a long fight, but I'm here for the duration, and I believe that we can take this company on. But we need everyone's help. Everyone sitting in this room, we need to capture that energy. We already know that Amazon's growing at a substantial rate. And they have over 1 million workers in this country. You heard President O'Brien say we have 1.3 million members. We need everybody involved in this fight. We need every labor union, we need every community partner, we need every activist involved. Actually here today, we have a couple of organizers here today that after the event, they'll be outside with some flyers. For anyone that's interested in getting involved and supporting, there's a QR code where you can scan it and take a look. Because there is a place for everybody in this movement. There's so much work to be done, from community engagement to holding the electeds accountable to coalition work. There's just so many different pieces that there is a place for everybody. But in the end, I do believe we can take the power back.
That's, I mean, it's, I think, a really important point to emphasize, Chris, that you're saying, right, about having a role for everyone in this movement, because of course, as important as our unions are, we still only represent something like 10% of the workforce, and so there's 90% of people in this country who need a role, and I think it's hugely important what you're saying there. I want to jump off of that, and especially your point about the moment that we're living in and how it might be fleeting, right? This might not last forever, what we're experiencing, and the importance of taking militant action while the time is right. President O'Brien, I want to pose this to you. And bring in kind of your second group of white-collar crime syndicalists, the politicians.
They might be number one.
They might be number one, right? Yeah, I mean, the rankings are constantly fluctuating. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. So with respect to Chris's point about kind of the moment and the opportunity right now, on the one hand, we should say that we've had a National Labor Relations Board over the last couple of years that has been good to workers, better than at any point in my lifetime, that's for sure. And at the same time, we saw a decision from the Supreme Court not long ago, Glacier Northwest, which involved your union, that threatens to make it illegal to strike in this country. So how do you make sense of sort of the political environment that we're up against, the opportunities that workers are creating, and what is to be done, the big task to be done?
I think first and foremost, you know, the NLRB is an antiquated process, and you know. Sorry. Oh yeah. Sorry. The NLRB is definitely an antiquated process that we try and avoid at all costs, and I think we're doing that through the Amazon campaign right now, because our strategy, Chris talked about the DSPs we've got shut down. What we've also been doing is we are not going to go right now the NLRB route to try and determine, you know, a group or to try and organize, to try and get certified, because it's a long, drawn-out process. I mean, I think I said earlier, the average statistic to get a first-year contract is about 406 days. And, you know, workers can only sustain so much. And, you know, that process is very litigious. And we think we're more effective, not only with the Amazon portion, but leveraging, you know, neutrality through direct action. So when we're going to organize a new group, instead of saying, hey, go through the process, what we've been doing now is gauging how strong this group is, empowering that we are going to support them and their families during these tough times, but are you willing to walk off your job to cause direct action to this company, and how long can you sustain it? So, you know, the NLRB has been a lot favorable, but it's still not bulletproof. And, you know, we need to elect people that are not going to just change the leadership of the NLRB, but change the policy of the NLRB, make changes, statutory changes that are actually going to be in effect regardless of who's in control, all for the betterment of working people. You know, we would love to see, and I think everybody on this stage would love to see the PRO Act, where, you know, union busting is a $500 million per year industry for union busters. And, you know, the PRO Act would obviously give us the ability to organize without any threats of retaliation and retribution. So that's why it's important to elect the right people and to ask them the tough questions when they're running for office. Will you support legislation like a PRO Act? The other thing we need to do, I think, in the grand scheme of things, outside of, you know, changing the NLRB process, taking direct action, is we need to take a hard look at not investing in our demise. When you really think about it, a lot of our unions, and I sit on many pension funds and health and welfare funds, and, you know, those funds are very important. We want them to do well. A lot of those funds are successful based upon contributions made by employers, but a lot of those funds depend upon investment return. And oftentimes, we don't do a good enough job of seeing what we're actually investing in, like private equity. A lot of private equity that union pension funds and health and welfare funds invest in are investing in direct competition to potentially our demise. They're investing in the Amazons, they're investing in the Uber, they're investing in the Lyfts, they're investing in these companies that have independent contractor models. They're investing in many things that could hurt us. So we've got to do a better job of also taking a look at where we're investing. And the next thing we need to do is focus on the antitrust laws that need to be revisited and changed, and the bankruptcy laws. Now, everybody's heard of Yellow Freight, where they just filed for bankruptcy, 22,000 Teamster jobs, and that's unfortunate. The problem with bankruptcy for us as unions is that because of the antiquated laws and the lack of change and the lack of fight and the lack of electing the right people, we are the last line we're last in line if there's anything left at the end of the day to capture on behalf of our members, whether it's owed contributions, whether it's benefits that haven't been paid out, or anything else. So we've got to focus on, you know, many, many different aspects of not just changing the NLRB, but looking at bankruptcy laws, looking at where we fall in all this. And that's why it's so important to not only, you know, carry out the missions of leadership, as was spoken about earlier, but also to not invest in our demise and look for change in these bankruptcy laws. It makes it too easy for these companies to file for bankruptcy, close down, give out these big bonuses, and then reopen under another brand in a simple fashion of just trying to break unions. So there's a lot at stake, but a lot of it has to do with setting policy and electing the right people that are going to help set this policy throughout this country.
Thanks. Jane, I want to pass it to you to, I mean, broadly on the same topic of sort of the political environment. I mean, you referenced the specter of authoritarianism. I think a Supreme Court like the decision like Glacier Northwest is a reflection of that very specter. And you've organized in right-to-work states, you've organized in non-right-to-work states, you've organized all over the country. And so can you just talk a little bit about how you see what President O'Brien and Chris are talking about?
Yeah. You know, one, really excited to have the Teamsters going all in to the Amazon fight. I think that's going to be needed, along with collaboration with the independents and several other players who are getting into that business, right? Amazon is going to be a multi-year, I think, multi-union war. But in addition to that, I mean, I did write about the coming Supreme Court decision that we know is around the corner. They're going to make up for the SCOTUS decision around Glacier was essentially just a messy decision. And they are out there looking for a nice, clean Supreme Court decision, either this cycle or next cycle, to functionally try to make all strikes illegal in the private sector, like they often are in the public sector. So one thing that I think right now is that the better we get at actually getting our members on strike, I mean, a credible strike threat is, I'm all for it. Sometimes it works for us. But in my life experience, I come out of a union in 1199 New England that believed in routinely striking, just routinely, because the strike is the way that the members retain the muscle to know how to do it. And when the muscle memory goes away, like you don't just walk back in the gym and like bench press 400 pounds. You actually have to go on strike to actually remember how to go on strike. And so one thing is, if you fast forward really with the Supreme Court, I mean, I said 2 years ago they were just getting on a tear, and they are really just getting on a tear. They're going to, I think we just need to assume, they're going to make the strike illegal, functionally illegal, very, very soon, one cycle or two. They have a lot of priorities of what they're trying to take down at once. So I think we have to do a measure of our effectiveness when they pay attention to us. Frankly, they just ignored labor unions for so long because we weren't doing anything or doing much to threaten the status quo of capital, and now we are. I think they're coming for us hard. So the question is, how do we do a hell of a lot of strikes now while they're not quite as legally challenging so that workers actually understand what it's going to take to build to 100% out with full community support, because we can do illegal strikes that way. And I'm arguing we better get ready for a hell of a lot of illegal strikes. And in the city of New York, and New York where there's the Taylor Law and all sorts of stuff, I think we're way overdue to start testing illegal strikes in so-called blue states, and we ought to be doing it right now. When you watch the West Virginia, I mean, look, to win any strike, legal or illegal, it's do you have 100% ready to go, and do you have the entire community with you? We know how to do those two things when we put our mind to it. And I believe there's going to be a lot of illegal strikes needed very, very soon, because they're going to be that way. So one is prepare for illegal strikes, and that takes twice the strength of what we've got right now. And the second is, I think the labor movement is still fundamentally doing a really poor job about seeing our own members as the community. Like, our vehicle to bringing the community with us is less about creating labor community coalitions at the top where people write checks to each other and you get someone with a priest and the thing and they show up at your picket line. That is like not the way to build community support, though that's what's considered building community support for most of the labor movement right now. And it's not enough just to do good messaging, though boy does good messaging help. We know it does, as a form of political education. But the best political education is when we see our own rank and file members as the central actors, not just at the bargaining table, not just in new organizing, but building what I call the third front for power, which is the broader community in which our members live. It's fundamental. In every campaign I've ever run, we've literally done a two-stage process. Stage one, charting the workplace, understanding leadership relationships, who are the informal leaders in the workplace, to get to a very big victory and then get to a first contract in record time. And secondly, the second thing we chart is every single relationship that every rank and file member has to their own community. Who is their parish priest? Who's their rabbi? Who's their imam? And then in delegations, once we chart them by the thousands, we then send those workers in to move the equivalent of the undecided informal leaders in the community who can break the entire community in favor of a coming strike or a coming contract campaign. So I think of that as the book I'm working on now, preview, book 5, is called Leave No Power on the Table. And I think we're still leaving a hell of a lot of power on the table. And maybe it's because I've gone up against some of the biggest SOB union busters in this country, from Brent Yessen. If you don't know him, you don't ever want to. Beat me up in an elevator once. That was a bad elevator ride. He shut the button off on that one. Anyway, forgot that one. But you know, sexual assault in an elevator by a union buster, that was fun as a young negotiator. And he was doing worse to the registered nurses in the hospitals, by the way. So from those kind of union busters, like modern day Pinkertons, we are leaving power on the table. And I think what I learned in really hard, what we call A-level boss fight, meaning there is not a limit on how much they can spend. There's not a limit on how many workers they fire in the campaign. There's not a limit on how many great people they drag out in handcuffs in the middle of a fight who's an identified leader, organic leader in the campaign. What I've learned is that we cannot leave 1 ounce of power on the table. And one of the biggest untapped parts of the power structure is our broader community, and seeing that it's our members who live in the community and themselves have what we call, in sociology I learned at age 45, strong ties versus weak ties. Hiring a staff person to go make relationships with faith leaders has no relationship to organizing the rank and file to go bring their own community into their own fight. It builds unbreakable solidarity, and we're going to need that kind of front row standing up when these strikes become illegal, like they were in the 1940s and 50s with, like, frankly, the images of the wives on the factories with arms sometimes, and I don't mean their own, I mean additional ones, ready to defend the gates before they even got to the workers. Like, that is where we are heading, because the capitalists are confused again right now by UAW's strategy. Like, that's good, they were knocked off guard. But that fight's gonna escalate. And I think all of us need to know how to be ready to do the escalation with them and stay 10 steps ahead of them.
Yeah, please.
So a couple of things, make some great points. Strikes are very effective.
Oh,
Strikes are very effective. You know, there's a lot of risk versus reward whenever you take someone out on the street. And I think we, as a union, the Teamsters Union, we strike probably more than anybody, or we have lately. And it's very effective, especially when you're extending picket lines nationwide to help support our brothers and sisters in many different arenas. And, you know, it is true that we could have had a catastrophic impediment on our right to strike through the Glacier decision. However, we didn't view that as a loss. We viewed that as the best of a worst-case scenario moving forward. But, again, to your point, it all starts from leadership. So we can hide behind a decision that wasn't favorable to us. We can hide behind and look for excuses on why we can't do certain things. But we've got to be creative. Number one, when we strike, we got to assess the group and make certain that we're not compromised in any way, shape, or form, because that's going to be the strength and integrity of the strike, which is most people are compromised financially, so you've got to be willing to make an investment and support those workers and their families when they're out as leaders. But you also got to lead, and unfortunately in the Glacier situation, direction wasn't given as far as what happens when you go on strike. You don't have workers go out to go deliver a product and then call the strike and have them leave the truck sitting running. You go out, finish your job, come back and park the trucks before you come across the line, right? That's the way we were always trained. And, you know, to your point, you have to have good leadership. But in the event, and we were prepared because we thought the worst was going to come with this decision, that in the event you do strike and you are responsible for losses or whatever may occur, you've got to be thinking about, before you go back to work, using your leverage. And the most important tool that we have is withholding our labor. But there is going to be an end in sight at some point in time, whether it's favorable or not. And that's why we were developing nationwide language in the event that we were going to be on the hook for damages, that we would have nationwide boilerplate language that we would not go back to work without amnesty and hold unions, local unions, international unions harmless. So there always is a will and a way to figure out how to get around certain things. And I'm all for striking. There's no one here that wanted to shut this country down more than I did. But at the end of the day, when you can leverage and you know that you haven't overpromised and underdelivered, and you were at where you're at with an 86.3% ratification vote, you know, the threat of a strike was very credible and very effective. But to your point, it may not work that way in every single industry. So it all starts from the top, and the leadership needs to lead.
Just one quick thing, I mean, on the things we should be doing to build on that. I am involved in a huge campaign right now, and we are in every single contract starting to bargain not that language, but similar but different language, and that's basically glacier-proofing your contracts now. And everyone should be doing it. It's a couple simple sentences. I'm happy to post them somewhere. We've drafted a bunch of different versions of it, but every single union going to the table needs to make sure they're putting glacier-proof language on, which essentially says this dispute shall not ever go to outside court systems, et cetera. So there's some different ways to write the sentences, and if the boss across the table knows what you're doing, it's going to be hella hard to win, just like common contract expiration. You got to be willing to strike to get the language, to get glacier-proof now for whenever the next Supreme Court decision hits.
And I think the one other thing that's just as important as amnesty, however it's crafted, is picket line protection language that gives you the right to not have to cross picket lines, whether they are in your industry or not in your industry. We fight all the time with other unions, mostly the building trades, who are great friends and great allies, but when we have an issue, they don't have picket line protection, meaning that they have to cross picket lines. They have to go to work. So there has to be a unified, uniform effort in organized labor to make sure that everybody has picket line protection. You know, when Unite Hair strikes at hotels, Unite Hair strikes wherever else, we as Teamsters, we provide rubbish delivery and rubbish pickup, liquor delivery, we provide food delivery. We withhold our services because we've got strong language, which further enhances the solidarity and puts pressure on these corporations to settle because they are not getting the goods and services. So outside of the amnesty, we all got to be thinking about picket line language. Right now, the SAG-AFTRA strike and the Writers Guild strike, the reason why no one's crossing those picket lines, we have 20,000 Teamsters nationwide that work in the motion picture industry, that does all the trucking, does all the chauffeuring, does anything with wheels as a Teamster on there. We have the strongest picket line protection, which is allowing us to honor those picket lines so no one's going to work. So that's something that we all have to be thinking about and putting on our radar screen as leaders. And that's going to be effective if we decide, and we have to, continuously strike.
This is why we're called the School of Labor and Urban Studies. I hope everyone is taking notes as you get ready for your next bargaining round. There's another issue. We've been talking about kind of the legal and political context and the opportunities. There's one other issue I want to bring into the conversation before we move to Q&A. That's one that you can't miss if you're paying attention these days, which is technology. You open the newspaper, you turn on TV, artificial intelligence is somewhere. And so I want to hear from Steve and Chris about how we should think about this. Steve is a scholar of technology and labor and is thinking a lot about this. And Chris, I know as you're strategizing around Amazon, technology is always on the mind. So Steve, could you maybe start by walking us through, I'm a labor historian, and when you read labor history, the idea that the robots are coming and taking all the jobs has been around for a long time. On the other hand, I got on ChatGPT a couple weeks ago, and I was like, this is scary. So how are the robots coming, or are they not? Or how should we make sense of it? And then Chris, I want to go to you to talk about.
Jane's looking at me like, yeah, Steve, what's going to happen? This is what capitalism does, right? Is it takes profit, it invests it in machines to reduce the amount of labor it needs or remove the need for expensive labor, right? And this process is happening continually. But in my work, the point that I've tried to make are really two important points that I think have been lost. One is that no technology necessarily has an inherent set of consequences for labor, right? It's contingent. It's contingent on labor power, and it's contingent on policy. And I'll just use the, well, let me cover the second point, which is we have been giving a free pass to technology companies on the consequences of what they're developing as owners of that technology. All of the stuff that, I don't have my cell phone on me, but all the stuff that is disruptive right now, most of it was paid for with our public dollars. Okay, so self-driving trucks, you know, this is a Defense Department program that started decades ago, which relied on billions of dollars in public investment in artificial intelligence, et cetera. The package delivery apps that we're seeing right now, the most important program to that transformation was the Navy's development of Global Positioning System. Okay, this is all, you know, public dollars, national hardware, right, up in space, that now, you know, Silicon Valley comes in when it's time to commercialize it, now that 95% of the investment has been done, you know, in public universities, et cetera, and says, well, now we're going to, you know, figure out how we can replace labor or make jobs worse or get cheaper, you know, cheaper labor in to do this work. We need to start owning, taking back our right as the public to these technologies and its consequences, and recognize that, you know, it's really going to be policy that determines and labor power that determines the outcome of that. And I'll give you the example of this. Perfect example is, you know, UPS, right? They're a very technologically sophisticated company. You know, your package car driver is carrying around a scanner that could speed up the work, that could, you know, push them to deliver faster, that could, you know, with the Orion system they developed, try to, you know, de-skill the work and have that worker-directed turn by turn, right? It has not had the consequence there that it has had in the Amazon DSP, where the drivers are dependent on that turn-by-turn package, you know, sequence, and the direct monitoring and direction of their behavior by that app, because of the Teamsters Union, right? Which has determined how that technology has played out. So we've got to get out of this mode of, you know, is technology, you know, going to wipe out all the jobs, or are we going to get run over by technology, and figure out how are we going to turn technology into something that's going to increase organizing opportunities, that's going to make jobs better, that's going to raise wages, right? Make workers more productive, but make sure that they get their cut of that productivity and the value that they're bringing. And central to that is policy, right? And we have to recognize that the rules that get set out, and this is where, you know, when we talk about nothing being left on the table in terms of collaboration and power for organizing, logistics workers are great because they move through public spaces, they use public infrastructure, right, and they link workplaces together. And the Teamsters are the #1 example of this, and this is why there have been laws passed forever, locally, federally, to control Teamster power, right, is because they've linked together workplaces so effectively and been such a threat to capital. When we talk about this revolution of last mile delivery, where we're taking the billions of hours that all of us spend going out shopping into jobs, this is a transformational, you know, this is a revolution in our landscapes, in our cities, in our way of life. These package, you know, delivery vehicles are going to be parked on our streets. They're going to be, you know, stopping at the crosswalks while our kids are getting out of school, right? They're going to be affecting our ability to fight climate change, right? They're going to, you know, so when we think about, you know, the city, the state, et cetera, there are all kinds of levers. We all have skin in this game, right? This isn't a private factory that's going to bring in some robots, right? This is our roadways. This is our neighborhoods, right? And we're the motoring public, right? And we've got to start owning that, you know, our right to those things, and building those broader coalitions where we say, you know what, City Hall, or you know, Business Owners Association, et cetera, like, you know, this is our infrastructure. We're paying for the roads, you know. That's my minivan over there with my kids in it, you know. And I think that's an area of growing power and potential power because of these logistics workers who are going to be coming to our doors, you know, more and more frequently.
Chris, you want to?
Yeah, just jump right in. I mean, I think, you know, there's no slowing down of technology, right? But there is something that we can do, and President Bryan spoke about it, is we can control the way technology is used in unionized workplaces through negotiations and a collective bargaining agreement. Whereas on the other hand, you have places like Amazon who have all control. It's run as a dictatorship, and technology is used on many different levels. Not only is it used for production standards, but quite frankly, they use it to spy, right? I mean, they use it to comb through people's social media accounts to see who's organizing. They use it as heat maps in their facilities to find out where people are getting together and finding out if they're moving in masses to have certain meetings, right? Technology can be used in a completely different way too, and in this context, it's out of control, right? But I'll tell you, it's also a motivator, right? Because we use it as an agitator, right? To these workers that are going in these places with unrealistic production standards, right? With no bathroom breaks, no access to water. I know those are health and safety issues, but these are all agitational issues. That nobody wants to go to work and feel like they're micromanaged. Not do they go in and give a hell of a day's work, to get put through the meat grinder, but also have to be micromanaged and watched every step of the way, right? And workers are starting to see this, and they're uprising over these issues. They're starting to see that the use of these technologies are really affecting the way they work. And there have been a couple studies that actually talk about what does that do to the mindset? What is that doing to the psyche of people that are going into these workspaces and dealing with these issues and the depression and things that it's causing? So, I mean, I think that's definitely something that we need to address. And I think we need to address it in an antitrust level as well, right? Because some of the things that they're doing and the surveillance, and they're quite frankly using a lot of this technology to prohibit people from exercising their Section 7 rights. And not only that, all the other issues that come along with it. So, there's two ways it can go, I think. I don't think we're ever going to slow it down, but I think we can control it in the process that we have, and I think it's proven that we can do that. Now we've got to lead the others to see that and agitate and move towards collective action.
Yeah, please.
All right, so the technology aspect, and we actually combated that very well under a unionized contract at UPS. But what do we do for the people that don't have the ability to be protected under a union contract? We've got to take it to the state legislature. We've got to take it to a national level. Now, technology is very sexy. It's very convenient, whatever that may be. And I think we have a society of convenience right now where people hit that send button and they want their package or they want their product that next day. But let's not lose sight of the fact technology is a jobs killer. It's a middle-class jobs killer. Everybody that wants to fall in love with these autonomous vehicles and autonomous tractor trailers, we're going to lose potentially hundreds of thousands upon millions of middle-class jobs. So we've got to fight under the union contracts to protect all these jobs from being replaced. We can embrace technology that may do away with jobs that we've been doing for a long time, but you have to have an ability. There's got to be some human element that we'll be able to replace and work along with technology that will maintain that standard of living at a higher middle-class wage. But you also have to look at the public safety risk. You look at this artificial intelligence, right, which is, I think, our brothers and sisters at the WGA, SAG-AFTRA, we're fighting on it in many different industries we represent. I'm sure you all are. We're scared of it, and we should be. We've got to make certain that the public understands what the risk is with all this automation and artificial intelligence. For instance, I am a fourth-generation truck driver. I drove tractor trailers all over this country, hauled equipment. I know that my instinct is a lot better than a robot. I know that my gut instinct is going to make me react that much more quicker, and my training is going to allow me to not be a public safety risk out there. And I think that's the narrative we need to say when we're talking about autonomous tractor trailers throughout this country. We also talked about infrastructure. We all made huge investments. Our grandchildren, future grandchildren, and great-grandchildren will be paying for these advancements. If you are going to link 3 tractor trailers together driven by a robot, that's 40 tons going down that road, pounding day in and day out as fast as it can go, which we're going to be actually destroying the investment we made in the infrastructure. But most importantly, the public safety issue, the risk. If you're driving down the road with a family of 4 and you've got a tractor trailer and you've seen bank accounts get hacked, you've seen your debit cards get hacked, you don't think these computers and these robots can be hacked in these tractor trailers or these autonomous vehicles where they could cause tremendous damage and risk thousands upon thousands of lives on a daily basis. And then you look at other things, tractor trailer drivers. When I was taught how to drive a tractor trailer, the one thing we were talked about is always be aware of your situation, your surroundings. If you're driving down the road and you see a highway patrolman or a state trooper, life in danger, you pull over and help. You think a robot's going to be able to do that? In the trucking industry right now, we have a national push and a national narrative, and I think we all know it's a major problem, human trafficking. Human trafficking is done at truck stops. It's done all around commercial drivers and vehicles. We are helping aid to end human trafficking. Is that going to happen with robots and or technology? No, it's not. So these are the arguments that we need to do. But more importantly, outside all those issues, it's a job killer. And we have to recognize that. And we all have an obligation. How many people go to a supermarket and they're in a rush and they go through self-checkout? How many people do that right now? I refuse to do that. I don't care if the line's 10 miles long, because you're putting someone out of work because of technology. So we all have an obligation. As I said earlier, let's not invest in our demise. Let's not embrace just this society of convenience without realizing what potential consequences could be. We have to think long and hard. And look, I'm the most impatient person in the world with everything. When I hit that button, I want it yesterday, but I want to make sure where it's coming from and who it's delivering, and we want humans doing that work.
Jane, do you want to?
Yeah, I think just one thing to note is, you know, if you look at the Unite Here strike going on in Los Angeles, and Unite Here led early in the Boston fight, by the way, in 2018. They led really early on checking the role of technology and forcing negotiations around it through a massive strike in Boston. And they're doing it again right now in Los Angeles, and their rotating strike, roving strike. You've got SAG-AFTRA and the writers and hotels right now on strike, basically trying to stop really awful technology. What's interesting is the UAW strike has a whole different challenge with technology, which is we desperately need the technological change that is going to get us out of the fossil fuel business. And so what's challenging to me is watching the complete failure of the environmental or climate justice movement, like wrapping themselves in the UAW fight right now. That is what's needed, because we need to get out of the business of fossil fuel if we're going to have life on the planet for any of us. But we cannot expect that to happen in the transition to electric vehicles unless, seriously, and until all those jobs are guaranteed union. And frankly, that's on Biden, and that's on the administration right now, and that's on an environmental and climate movement that, while it is making some progress understanding the role of the working class in the fight to save the planet, it's not getting there fast enough, speaking of leadership change. We need some big environmental organizations that frankly should be weighing in like nobody's business right now, surrounding and embracing the UAW struggle, and demanding that every single electric vehicle job and battery plant is going union coming out of this UAW strike. And shy of that, it's going to be very hella hard to win. So there's like technology we have to stop as a trade union movement, and technology that we have to fight for, and it's going to take a lot of strength, and we're like absent in that fight right now.
If I could just follow up on that. So, you know, you're 100% right as far as capturing as much work, especially through technology, and the electric vehicles are coming. I think everybody's utilizing them. But the one struggle, and we always look at where our strengths are, the one struggle in any fight is the union density of that union.
That's right.
So, like for our fight at UPS, we're 100% Teamster unionized throughout the entire country. Even in the right-to-work states, we hold about 93% membership in this unit. The struggle, and this is where we all have to be smart leaders moving forward, is making certain that we are protecting our existing work, especially on a union contract, but capturing that union density, to your point, of the new technology and new plants to get what we call card check neutrality throughout all these agreements, so that in the event they do open up a plant within South Carolina. I heard Nikki Haley bragging on Cavuto the other day how she is a staunch union buster and she would welcome any additional work from the big three because they do have automaker plants there. So that's another thing that we have to focus on as leaders, is making sure that whatever we negotiate, that we provide and demand opportunity to organize in the non-union as well, which is going to be huge moving forward, because whatever deal is reached, it's only successful if you can capture and maintain that work moving forward.
And the standards, right? It's like capture the work with the standards we expect, yeah.
Great. I want to move us into the Q&A section of our discussion. We had a number submitted in advance, so I'm going to start with a couple of those, but I think all of you have sheets of paper as well on your tables. If you've had a chance to write one down, or if you get a chance to, it sometimes is helpful because a lot of people have similar questions, so I can kind of classify some together. And then I think we will also try to, we have a mic here so we can get to a few of those. But if you've written them down, it'd be really helpful for just moderating this process. So one question we have that was submitted early from Luis is about sectoral organizing and bargaining. He writes, have you all thought about what a sectoral organizing strategy would look like to take on Amazon? This is a concept that's been kind of a hot term in the labor movement over the last few years. And so anyone, this is open to anyone. I mean, what we make of sectoral bargaining as a concept, as a strategy, a strategic approach, I just want to put it on the table. We're dealing with logistics, which is, as Steve sort of set up for us at the outset, a complex and big sector. So I'll open this up to whoever wants to take it. This is from, was submitted by Luis.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Gives a good answer, I'll take credit for it. Gives a bad one, I don't know who trained him.
No, sectoral, and how that plays out in context of the U.S. You know, I honestly haven't given it much thought, but just kind of thinking it through in the way that we operate under the laws that we do. I'm not so sure that sectoral organizing is going to work, right? I mean, I think we've tried it in just partnerships, and just on a lower level of partnerships and creating coalitions, right? And bringing ideas and movements to tables. It's very difficult to get people on the same page and moving in the same direction, right? I mean, you could see it, we talk about in the context of Amazon, right? We've seen the strategies that were taken, and I agree there's no silver bullet, but just getting people on the same page, moving in the same direction, trying to accomplish the same goal has been extremely difficult, even on a micro level, never mind on a large scale macro level, where you're looking at, you know, everyone getting on the same page and moving in the same direction. I mean, I think first we need to focus on coalition building and getting on the same page, and trying to have someone like the Teamsters lead the fight with partnerships behind us to spread out throughout the country.
I think it's a global issue as well, because, we have a lot of global partners. I think we have 118 for the Teamsters transportation unions throughout the world. And, but, our laws aren't as good as some other countries and some other areas in this world, which gives us, we're at a disadvantage. But, and the relationships are different. A lot of these European companies have good relationships with employers because they have to, adhere to stricter, more consequential laws for workers, where, we partner up and they say they're going to help, and, they are effective in certain areas, but it all comes back to what we're going to do in the States and what is going to support us and what is going to hurt us. And, I think the strategy at Amazon that we've used that's been effective, not only, the worker-to-worker communication, which is extremely effective, like we talked about earlier, showing them what you get when you work under a union contract, but it's the community building portion that's the most important. Amazon has a record of 150% turnover ratio. They have targeted low-income neighborhoods to build a lot of their facilities, and they just recycle people in and out. What we've been successful in doing around the country, not in every area, is making sure that we go to local, town, city government, make sure that they're passing ordinances and/or resolutions that will mandate Amazon uphold industry standards, which those industry standards are usually dictated by the UPS or DHL. Landlocking a lot of these folks, so putting direct pressure on Amazon is how we're going to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, there is no set strategy that's going to be foolproof. Again, like I talked about earlier, when we're organizing Amazon, it's got to be a plan, a strategy, execute that strategy. But if that strategy isn't working, we've got to pivot and move and start, looking at other ways to do it. The global partnerships are great, but sometimes they're not as effective as we think they are.
Yeah, maybe just one more.
Go ahead.
One more quick word on that. I have had the pleasure of doing a ton of work now outside of the U.S. And certainly in Germany. There's some Germans here, they could speak for themselves, but they've schooled me very well in the limitations of sectoral negotiations, quite frankly. And I think the way it's talked about in the United States, both Germany as sort of Shangri-La, which, sorry, it's not, in terms of labor law, but also the laws that have actually been, sort of the proposals that have been written in the U.S. to get to sectoral bargaining, to me have so far been shortcuts. It's as if we get sectoral bargaining and we don't have to organize and strike. The truth is, even if you have sectoral bargaining laws, you must continue to exercise the strike muscle, or you're just going to get a weak sectoral deal. So you can have a crappy sectoral agreement, or you can have a really strong one. And the UAW in the 1940s and 50s in this country was doing sectoral bargaining without a law, right? You took the sector, you sat down, you lined up your contracts, and you went. And the union I came out of lines up every nursing home contract and long-term care contract in New England, will strike to get the same common expiration date, and is effectively sectoral bargaining, right? So it can be weak or strong. It's all about, are the workers empowered and enabled to do what they need to do when they need to do it, which is actually exercise the strike muscle, sectoral or not.
Well, I think, in addition to the, comments on sectoral bargaining, which I completely agree with, the sector-wide stuff, we do need to do a lot of sector-wide stuff. It's great that we have an excellent contract in a big part of parcel that, workers can see and see the value of what that brings. President O'Brien mentioned, what do we do for these, folks who are not unionized? And there we need to really think about how we're going to raise that floor. And I'll give you the one example is just the health and safety concerns of this algorithmic management for delivery. I talk to drivers all the time for DSPs. Many of them are actually trained to jog from the truck up to a house, right? Now they're new to the work. They don't understand that, you might be able to do that for a week, a month, right, without getting hurt. But if you're going to make a career out of package delivery in Worcester, Massachusetts in winter, you can't jog to the door, right? And so people are being pushed by this algorithmic management, and we're seeing, phenomenal rates of injury and stuff like that. That's somewhere where across the sector we should be passing laws, right, about what you're able to do to workers and put them at risk, right, to eliminate these things. Similarly, we get, all this interaction, right, between UPS, FedEx, the DSPs, and most importantly now, the U.S. Postal Service, right? Letter carriers are coming up for a contract negotiation, and they're going to need a lot of support. They're under more restrictions, right, by law than other unions, right? And so we need to be organizing across those services. The good thing in logistics is there aren't that many of them, right? It's pretty concentrated. And so it's a little simpler than in some other places in transportation where you got 1,000 different actors, fly-by-night companies, et cetera. And so we really need to strengthen those sectoral-wide relationships.
I think, well, so a rule of mine in these is first questions get to go to students or recent graduates. So I got a question here from Natalie, which is actually echoed by a few others. And it's kind of, I think, nicely jumps off of this topic, which is about the averted rail strike last year. I know it's on a lot of people's minds and how we're all thinking about it, so I just want to pose it to the group. It came up in several questions, so I'll try to synthesize the essence of it, which is how did the resolution of the rail strike affect the Teamsters' thinking and going into UPS? How should it, and how should the political response and political crisis around it affect how we think about Amazon and other logistics industry organizing going forward?
Well, I think just so everybody's clear about the rail strike, or the potential for the rail strike, we represent the BLET, which is the train locomotive engineers, and the BMW ED are the folks that install, repair, and maintain the infrastructure that the trains are on. That is, and I think it's the whole industry was represented by about 17 different international unions doing, various trades. But people were fast to criticize why there wasn't a strike in the rail division. Now, everybody I think that knows the Railway Labor Act is basically governed by Congress. And it's a process that's antiquated. It's a never-ending process if you can't get a deal. And at that point in time, when you come to a stalemate, so to speak, that's when mediation occurs and the Congress can enact, which they did, the PEB, which the board's recommendation. Now, I just want to give a little insight to, the current administration obviously gets criticized quite a bit, but this process of bargaining with the railroads started under the Trump administration. And we were able to leverage, when we got into office, our political, in a short time period, our influence to get the White House to agree to a presidential emergency board fast-tracked, meaning that, the mediation process went through, the arbitration process, and the arbitrator, the 2 out of the 3 arbitrators determined what the process would be. And again, if there was further impasse, then Congress had the ability to implement the contract. Now, we were influential in getting that fast-tracked as a Teamsters union on behalf of the other unions represented. So it's a very, very intricate process. And all through the process, there was concern nationwide that a nationwide rail strike would throw the country into a recession, which was realistic because, again, we talk about indirect issues that may occur because of a strike. You would have had a lot of logistics like UPS and FedEx and Amazon who depend a lot about their freight getting moved on the rails, getting pulled off by trucks and delivered to these centers. Wasn't going to happen. So there would have been, a lot of consequences as a result of it. But, at the end of the day, if that's what had to happen, it was necessary to happen to make sure that these workers got what they wanted. Fortunately, through I think if you look at a positive out of a negative situation, there was a lot of criticism on why the railroads didn't strike. There was a lot of criticism of the administration for putting that vote to Congress. But it actually highlighted one of the major problems in the railroad industry was paid time off for families, which wasn't achieved during the mediation and or the arbitration that was awarded and implemented by Congress. But it put a real bad light on the carriers for not providing paid time off and disciplined people for utilizing any type of paid time off. So we had a meeting actually last week at our General Executive Board meeting where because of the public pressure, because of the stockholders, because of the boards being involved, what we weren't able to achieve through the process under the RLA is now being achieved in negotiations one-on-one with these carriers and the locals throughout the country because we put such a heightened alert on the issue of paid time off that now our members in the railroad are getting sick time, they are getting paid time off, and they're not getting disciplined for using it. So if there's any negative, positive that can come out of the negative, look, if we don't always get what we want, especially through that process, once we highlight and that resonates with people, I think right now, compared to 20 or 30 years ago, family life quality is very important, and everybody recognizes that. So, you know, that was one of the narratives, and I think we were successful in achieving that, even though it's an antiquated process that I believe needs to be revisited as well.
Anyone?
I mean, I just quickly on that. There was a moment where any number of us, I think, should have given a little administration tutorial on how to negotiate. Because in fact, there was a moment where all Biden had to do was say, you got about 14 days to deliver like 21 days of sick time, or we're going to unleash them. And in a similar way, Sean, that you described that you were making it UPS's choice to strike you, I think it was a really blundered opportunity on the part of Biden to not extract 14, which was the demand. I would have said 21 paid sick days that these workers could use anytime they want, and counted the clock down on the bosses and said 14 days. We're either going to let the workers walk or you're actually going to do this. So it's good to know that little by little it's happening. But back to the sectoral question and back to the uses of power, and the guy who keeps saying he's the most pro-union president has yet to really actually demonstrate it. And that moment was not a good one for us, I don't think.
And listen, I just may respond to that. And look, everybody's entitled to their opinions, but when the Biden administration took over outside of the rail situation, under the Trump administration, there was a real pandemic going on. That was the potential for pension funds to collapse throughout this entire country, not just Teamster pension funds, but there were 200 pension funds throughout this country that were critical and declining. And under the Biden administration, under the Trump administration, we tried to pass Butch-Lewis, which would have, you know, made these pension funds solvent for 30 years under the same plan that was proposed under the Biden administration. Long story short is, look, we're not thrilled with a lot of decisions that the administrations make, but I will say this on behalf of the Teamsters Union and my retirees and active members, for the next 30 years, because Biden lived up to one of his promises that said he was going to fix pension funds throughout this country, that I know my mother, who my father died suddenly 12 years ago, doesn't have to worry about her pension because it's solidified for the next 30 years. And again, you know, that's just a demonstration on, hey, maybe Biden's not doing this in this arena, but we can't lose sight of the fact of what he did for 300 pension funds that could have been insolvent and people wouldn't have got paid, and they would have been subject to the pension benefit guarantee that may have given a maximum of $1,100 per month. So, not that I want to debate it, but I do have to call balls and strikes. He has done some good stuff for working people.
Oh, I don't, he's done a few good strikes. Few good things.
Steve, you wanted to say
Well,
something.
I just wanted to, you know, take a step back and think about, you know, this transformation in logistics, right? The Railway Act, right? The specific laws, Landrum Griffith and some others that were, you know, meant to diminish Teamster power. You know, all this is because logistics workers have so much potential power that has, you know, been eroded by, you know, law and policy for, you know, since the railroad strikes in the 1870s, right? And we got to think about ways to get some of that back, because, I mean, that's why we're having this, you know, debate right now about these things, and is because, you know, logistics workers have so much structural power, right? And you know, we can utilize that once we have public support, once we have, you know, greater momentum to rebuild the union movement. Like, we need to free up more of that power and use it more effectively, because it's frankly tremendous, right? They're the connective tissue of the economy.
And it's worth noting that the Railway Labor Act was passed in 1926 after some big railroad strikes that struck a lot of fear in the hearts of the governing class in this country, almost 100 years ago. Okay, I got another. This question also came up in a few different forms, and this is from John, a current student of ours. So I'm going to bring a few together for this. And it's a question I know that's also on a lot of people's mind, which is how to move the labor movement, and especially unions with substantial resources, to take advantage of the organic organizing that's going on all over the place. John writes, how do we get unions with large coffers and or organizing infrastructure to support organizations fighting to unionize, and how important is community organizing to unions? It's from John.
Yeah, and I think this kind of goes hand in hand, right? I mean, we've got to start at a very basic grassroots level and start with education, right? It's fundamentally unionization, education has been lost. I know my kids, the last time they talked about a labor union was in 3rd grade. I remember my little guy coming home and saying, "Yeah, Dad, we talked about unions today, and I told him you were a Teamster," and he was all excited, right? But that was it, right? And like as Sean alluded to earlier, that, you know, that generational knowledge passed down generation at the dinner table, at cookouts, at things of that nature, have been lost. So we've got to get back to the fundamentals of education, outreach, connecting with community partners, and having these discussions to start to educate the masses, so then we can harness that energy and move towards collective action and shutting it down, taking the power back.
Anyone else?
Yes.
All right, yeah, that's well said. Well, I think we could take maybe one, depending on how long it goes, 1 or 2 from the mic. If anyone, is there any open hands? I know a few, I didn't get to a few, so if you wrote one down I didn't get to and you want to pose it at the mic. I tried to cluster the ones that came in groups, but there's a few that are really good questions, and so if anyone would like to.
Come to the mic to ask, that we prioritize student questions. Thanks.
Yeah, my name is Luigi from Germany. I'm working as an organizer in different sectors, mainly hospitals, but also public sector bargaining. And I wanted to ask a question because this year it's the 10th anniversary of the first strike at Amazon in Germany. Amazon has created 20 the big centers.
Hubs?
No, not the fulfillment centers. Since this was the first inroad into the German market, and then the last 3 years they are starting also to create the chains until the last mile. Before they relied on the DHL to deliver the last mile. And so the organizing process in Germany started a bit by accident. Just 1 or 2 organizers in 1 or 2 places started to connect to workers that have had grievances and then started to organize. And there is now a base of several thousand members, also like reproducing itself and being able to strike, but it's the way that Amazon has learned how to deal with a strike, because it's a strike only like in 8 of the 20 fulfillment center and none of the last mile facilities. And so they can reroute, and they are experts in rerouting. And so my question is, how do we not fall into the trap of like starting an organizing process in 1 or 2 facilities, but on the whole of the company, and in this way prevent the rerouting, which the logistic revolution is all about, like redundancy and so on. And what's your plan for Amazon in the US? And because in Germany, it's a bit stalled, the organizing drive, because Amazon has learned a lot about.
And before you get that, are there 1, maybe 2 other questions out there, just to get the questions out, and then folks can decide to respond, which to respond to? Anybody else put your hand up, please?
First, thank you for taking the time to be here. It's been very enriching, mainly for you, Chris and Sean. Your organizing and your successes have been primarily concerned with the private sector. So I'm curious what insights you could share, and the rest of our panelists, of what we could glean for public sector organizing.
Well, I don't know if that's accurate because we are razor sharp focused on. We're razor sharp focused on organizing both in the private sector and the public sector. I'm not sure you're aware of this, but the third largest block of our membership is public sector. And we obviously saw what happened with the Janus decision. And that was a perfect example of not making the right choices politically, where we actually invested in some cases in our demise in the public sector. But with that said, we have been organizing in the public sector nationwide. I think we've got a lot of public universities that are now organizing with us. But the most important thing to organize in the public sector is to have the strongest contracts in the public sector, as I spoke about earlier, and point out. And the one thing that we don't do good enough in a labor union, I think we're getting better at it, not just the Teamsters, but in general, is we get a bargaining unit, we get them a contract, we get comfortable, we don't enforce it. And when you're not enforcing a contract, no matter how good it is, then you're not doing a service to people that may not be working under a contract, especially in the public sector, to want to join the union. So we've been doing focused on the education portion of it, the enforcement, but also identifying potential targets within the public sector that aren't represented, that give us the right under the law to organize them. So we are dialed in strong on the public sector. We think it's probably one of our greatest opportunities to grow is in the public sector.
Great. We're going to take one quick question, and you all will kick it to you to answer, respond to anything. Go ahead.
My name is Ramala. I'm part of the union semester program, and I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on minority unionism. I think it's like a practice that like some unions, like the United Electrical Workers or union is doing. I think the alphabet workers and Apple are doing, and I just wanted to hear what y'all think about that.
Well, I mean, diversity is a key priority for labor unions. I know I can speak for the Teamsters Union. We are probably one of the most diverse unions because we organize in every sector throughout the country. There's a joke that if a fire hydrant could be organized, the Teamsters Union would get them to sign a card. So diversity is very important in our industry. And look, the faces of the American workers are changing, so we've got to embrace diversity, but more importantly, promote it, not just on the rank and file level, but on the leadership level as well.
Can I ask a quick question on that? I think, if I'm not wrong, I think the question was about the strategy of not minority in the context of diversity, but minority of sort of the militant minority?
Yes.
Yeah. That's a big topic to ask at the end. Really big, brother. We could be here for hours on that one. But I don't personally embrace it because I think that some of the folks who are engaged in this concept of the militant minority often themselves fail to embrace the concept of building majoritarian support inside of the workplace. And there is no way in hell for any of us who have negotiated contracts and led strikes to believe that only like 20% of the workers walking out is going to get the same. First of all, they're going to get their ass fired in this country, but there's no way that a militant minority is going to do better than a militant, fired up supermajority going after their employer. That's the beginning of a long article that's coming out of me soon.
Well, I think we negotiate contracts and represent workers so that everybody is treated equally and fairly. Whether, I think to your point, the entire group, regardless of anything else, especially if you're going to strike, needs to be militant, needs to be walking one direction, one mission. That's to get the best contract equally for everybody.
Well, I wanted to jump in on this too, but I do think a militant minority can be used to gain momentum in a fight.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes we have to build a militant minority to take ownership and come out with public support and take ownership of whatever effort they're trying to change in order to attract new folks. But also, we have also seen that in militant minority actions, that real change can take place. We've seen it in many locations, speaking specifically to Amazon, where minority workers or a minority of workers have marched on the boss and made demands, and they've conceded to those demands. So there is a place for it, and it can stop there. But if we're going to get to a collective bargaining agreement,
That's right.
we need a militant majority.
That's right.
And just before we wrap it, I know we had a question from our organizer from Germany about, the challenge that they've encountered with Amazon there, if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
Well, you
one.
asked about the strategy, right? I can't tell you the strategy because we don't want it out in the street, right? But, there is a plan in place. And, the tough part for us, I know that we've faced with Amazon, and to your point, they're very mobile. Logistics, they know how to operate, they know how to move. And I think what you're alluding to is in Germany, they ran from the strength, right? Well, the good thing about the United States is we've pinpointed where their strong points are and where they can't run from, and where they have set up shop. And they have set up shop just like FedEx has, and DHL and UPS. They're all within proximity of each other. So I'll give you a little tidbit of strategy that we are focusing on the large metropolitan areas where they can't run and where they have to do business, where we think we have leverage and we'll have the ability, and on the states that have strong language like California or laws that support workers. So that is part of the strategy. And look, it's like anything else. We believe we're the only union that can represent Amazon. I don't mean that disrespectfully in the package delivery business. We have a proven track record with UPS. We've represented them for over 80 years, got the strongest contracts. So, we do have a template and a ability to organize and represent them. But to your point is, they can run, but they can't hide. All we need is one big victory in a major metropolitan city, and that's going to be the template that we take nationwide. And we think we're going to be able to do that. But to your point, it's not going to happen tomorrow. I mean, this is a 5-6 year process that could have many trials and tribulations that we're going to have to change and adapt to. But if I gave you the strategy, I know, listen, I have a saying that if you tell a Teamster a secret, it's no longer going to be a secret. So we don't tell anything.
Any closing remarks, Chris, Jane, or Steve?
Yeah, just in general, I think the whole basis comes down to worker power. Getting back on a grassroots level, engaged in the shop floor, educating, mobilizing, and provoking workers to take direct action to make demands and change and empower people. And that empowerment and that change can be effective, right? But we also need engagement from every one of you. We need everybody on every different level engaged in these fights, having these conversations, moving their electeds, meeting with their community groups, talking to their churches. We need to be talking about this to everyone, right? We need to be making assessments of who's going to be on board, who's with us. And I'm asking you all today to get involved, right? Participate in any level that you can. There's workers out there right now that are on strike, that are fighting for their lives, they're fighting for their livelihoods, they're fighting for change, but they're not only fighting for those 84 people that are out there on the street, they're fighting for the industry. Because if we can make change with those 84 workers, and we can see change, and we make a difference, we know we can do it everywhere else. And it's up to us to keep those people afloat. I'll tell you, Amazon has money. We're never going to compete with the money that they have. But if we have the people, we can move anything. And that's what we got to get back to, is the people. So we're going to have some people outside, a couple of my brother Teamsters out there, handing out flyers. Please, take a flyer, scan it, get involved in any capacity you can. Whether, we have a strike fund set up for these workers. If you can donate $1 a month, great. If you can help on a Sunday, taking some action, great. If you know somebody that people to put in some work, great. We have a spot for everybody. Get involved.
I just quickly reiterate the building the third front for power, which is the one least often attended to since McCarthyism, which is actually how we look at our workers as whole workers who have a set of concerns outside the workplace that are just as intense and deep as the concerns they have at work. And it's to our detriment, I think, as a labor movement, that we only focus on addressing the crisis of workers at work if we begin to address the crisis of the working class more broadly, I think we generate leads. My life experiences, having built a tenant union accidentally in the middle of a fight to unionize a bunch of workers, the way that we generated more new organizing leads was by realizing that once people saw us stop the demolition and gentrification of a bunch of public housing units in Connecticut years ago, we literally had people like walking into our office saying, we want one of those too. So the more we win on issues outside of the workplace, the more we're speaking to the 90% who are not in a unionized workplace.
I want to just highlight how important I think the Amazon organizing is. I mean, I think this is the fight of the century, in my opinion. And as big and scary as Amazon is, with all of its money and technology and other things, in my opinion, if you look at traditional transportation worker strategies for organizing that the Teamsters really invented and perfected, you couldn't build a company more susceptible to those strategies in many ways than Amazon, right? It is interconnected, it's time sensitive, right, based on speed, and it's customer facing, right? In transportation, where workers have been weaker, is, they're in the back of a Walmart distribution center, and truckloads are going from producers to those distribution centers, and there's very little leverage there. Amazon has built a very leverageable network, and I think that is incredibly promising, and we all need to get behind that effort, because I do think the potential spillover effects of that victory when it comes, it's going to be a tough slog, are huge. And just to get to that redundancy question, this whole logistics revolution, right, is about the inefficiencies of these long, complex supply chains. Redundancy is expensive, right? And so the more we can leverage the power that workers have as this lean network that Amazon is trying to develop, right, to force them to be redundant, the more the costs are going to pile on of those strategies. That's where the power is in forcing them to be redundant.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Super, super insightful, instructive. If I'm going to take one line away, it's we can't be afraid to lose. And thank you all for this incredible panel. President O'Brien, Chris Smolinski, Jane McAlevey, Steve Viselli. What a way to open up the year. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You out there? I got a 5 o'clock Amtrak.
A couple announcements as folks are departing. We have boxed lunches for everyone outside, so please do grab a boxed lunch. Our understanding is that the elevators are also still a little wonky, so take your time with lunch, socialize, and make your way downstairs. Thanks.